For the last couple of decades, whenever a major news alert flashes across our screens about some kind of global attack, there's um there's this almost automatic assumption we all make about why it happened.
We immediately look for the religious angle.
Exactly. It's like this persistent post 9/11 hangover. We just assume that a grand, sweeping, fanatical theology is the primary engine behind the violence.
Yeah, we want the manifesto or the radical doctrine because, well, it provides a neat, understandable box to put a very chaotic, terrifying event into.
It makes it make sense, but relying on that default setting today means we are often completely misdiagnosing the threat.
Totally. And that's exactly what we are exploring in this deep dive. It's a fundamental rewiring of how we understand the motives behind modern attacks.
Because the real driving force behind the violence we're seeing today often has far less to do with religious fervor and much more to do with things that are shockingly personal.
We're talking about incredibly human drivers, like a search for personal validation, a desperate need for a sense of belonging, or, even just pure, unfiltered notoriety.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today we are unpacking a really fascinating piece of source material. It's a comprehensive academic review of Martin J. Gallagher's book, Terror for Profit, The New Wave of Identity Terrorism.
And Gallagher brings a really unique dual perspective to this, which I love. He isn't just an academic sitting in a library somewhere.
Right, he spent over 30 years in Scottish law enforcement.
Exactly. So he's looking at this phenomenon through the eyes of a beat cop, an investigator, and a scholar all at once.
It is a fiercely practical, operational way to look at the world. He's looking at what the perpetrator actually gets out of the crime on a personal level.
Yeah, and we really want to give you, the listener, today is a new tool to decode the news.
But before we dive into the mechanics, we do need to set the parameters here. Because Gallagher's framework is built on real-world data, the text specifically analyzes some incredibly heated ongoing conflicts.
We're going to be talking about the conflict in Gaza, the events of October 7th, Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, and domestic white supremacy.
Right, so we need to be very clear. We are putting on our detective hats today to look strictly at the cold, hard mechanics of how these groups operate on the ground, according to Gallagher's law enforcement framework.
We're taking no sides.
None. We are endorsing no viewpoints and passing no moral judgments. This is a purely analytical exercise to understand the source material.
And that analytical lens is so crucial. I mean, we really want to understand Gallagher's micro-level approach.
I like to think of the old way of analyzing terrorism like checking a car's make and model.
Yeah.
You see a Ford or a Honda, or in this case, a broad religious or political label, and you think you know everything about the vehicle.
Right. You judge it by the badge on the outside.
Exactly. But Gallagher's approach is like taking one of those diagnostic scanners and plugging it directly into the car's computer under the dashboard.
He bypasses the brand name to read the specific engine fault inside. He wants to know the actual psychological driver making that specific person move.
And to appreciate why plugging in that diagnostic scanner is so revolutionary, we really need to look at the historical timeline we are stepping away from, right?
Yeah, so scholars in security studies have long relied on this chronological framework developed by David Rappaport. It's known as the 4 waves of terrorism.
And Rappaport basically mapped out how the dominant motivations for political violence have shifted over the last, century and a half?
Yeah, roughly. So the first wave he identified was the anarchist wave, which kicked off back in the 1880s.
That was the era of the invention of dynamite, right? Like targeted assassinations of royals and politicians.
Exactly, a generalized desire to dismantle the state. Then, as the fallout of World War I began to fracture global empires in the 1920s, we moved into the anti-colonial wave.
Right, so people fighting for self-determination against occupying forces.
Correct. Following that, the 1960s ushered in the third wave, the new left wave. This was heavily influenced by the Vietnam War and Marxist ideology.
That's when we saw all those high-profile hostage takings and hijackings, right?
You got it. And finally, sparked largely by the geopolitical shifts around 1979, we entered the fourth wave, which is the religious wave.
And for the last 40 years, the consensus has basically been that we are still firmly entrenched in this fourth wave.
Which is why we all have that post-9/11 hangover we mentioned earlier. We expect every attack to fit that fourth wave mold.
But Gallagher makes a massive departure here. He argues the evidence shows the religious wave is actually over.
Yeah, he says we have crossed the threshold into a brand new, all-embracing fifth wave, which he defines as profit-motivated identity terrorism.
Okay. Profit-motivated identity terrorism. That is a dense phrase. We need to redefine what profit means in this context, because when I hear the word profit, I naturally picture like offshore bank accounts.
Right, crypto wallets or suitcases full of cash.
Exactly. But while actual criminal financial gain is a part of it, Gallagher's definition of profit is much broader, isn't it?
Much broader. In this fifth wave, the most significant currency is reputation enhancement. It is the acquisition of status, notoriety, and a terrifying kind of celebrity within a specific subculture.
Okay, wait. I want to pause on that because it's a really jarring concept for the average news consumer.
It is, yeah.
If an attacker isn't doing this for money and they aren't truly driven by a grand, selfless religious ideal, are we saying they are essentially committing atrocities for clout?
Basically, yes.
The idea that reputation could possibly rival a deeply held ideology as a motivation, I mean, that seems almost too cynical to believe.
It seems cynical until you adopt the mindset of an investigator who spent 3 decades interviewing criminals.
Right. A detective doesn't just read a perpetrator's polished manifesto and accept it as absolute truth.
No, they look at the daily behavior, the text messages, the search history, the social isolation.
So for an individual who feels completely alienated or invisible or powerless in society.
The notoriety they can gain through violence is intoxicating. The knowledge that their name will be feared, that they will suddenly matter to a global network of peers, that is their profit.
It's ultimate personal validation.
Exactly. They adopt an extreme ideology because it provides the fastest, most effective vehicle to achieve that personal notoriety. The ideology is just the tool. The pursuit of status is the master.
That sums up the micro-level view perfectly. The human being's personal psychological payoffs are driving the car, even if they've painted a massive ideological slogan on the hood to get attention.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
But this paradigm shift doesn't just apply to angry individuals in basement forums, right? The source text shows how this exact quest for reputation as profit scales up to massive global organizations.
It does. And this brings us to a foundational concept in the book, originally developed by researcher Tamara Makarenko. It's called the crime-terror nexus.
Right. Makarenko observed that the traditional boundary separating organized crime syndicates from ideological terror groups has, well, it's essentially vanished.
Yeah, and Gallagher applies this nexus to a wide array of global actors. He looked at the Wagner mercenary group, the FARC rebels in Colombia, Hezbollah, Hamas, and ISIS.
Let's talk about the FARC evolution because that's a textbook example of this nexus.
It really is.
Yeah.
They started in the 1960s as a hardline Marxist-Leninist peasant army fighting for land redistribution.
Which very clearly fits Rappaport's third wave, the new left wave.
Right. But over the decades, they realized that taxing and controlling the cocaine trade was incredibly lucrative.
So eventually, the ideological revolution just became a secondary backdrop to running one of the largest drug cartels on the planet.
Exactly. The ideology provided a convenient rebel branding for what became a massive criminal enterprise.
It's fascinating. And the ISIS example in Gallagher's text operates on a similar pivot, though obviously focused on power and territory rather than narcotics.
Yeah, because the general public views ISIS as the ultimate manifestation of the religious wave.
Right, the fourth wave.
But Gallagher points out that their operational behavior actually points to an ethno-nationalist struggle.
Okay, let's break down ethno-nationalist for a second, because that's a term that gets thrown around in academia a lot.
It does, yeah.
It essentially means a group defined by a shared ethnic or cultural identity trying to carve out and control their own physical nation state, complete with borders.
Right. It's about land and governance, not just a spiritual awakening.
And the text highlights a really crucial linguistic detail here, which is that the word caliphate itself simply translates to state.
State. Yeah, it strips away the mystical aura surrounding the group. When you look at how ISIS actually operated at its peak, they were focused on earthly administrative goals.
They were collecting taxes, selling oil on the black market, managing municipal services, and holding physical territory.
They functioned as an illicit state enterprise. And Gallagher also uses a striking example from closer to home for him, which is the Irish Republican Army, or the IRA.
The IRA history is so interesting here. You have figures who originally fought these bloody campaigns under the banner of political liberation for Northern Ireland.
Right. But now, years after the Good Friday Agreement, Gallagher notes that many former IRA actors are primarily motivated by organized criminal profit.
Right. So they are running illicit smuggling rings, moving counterfeit goods, and dealing drugs.
Yet they continue to sporadically commit or threaten acts of political violence.
Why? I mean, why keep doing that if you're just a drug dealer now?
Because they keep the old political branding alive, specifically for the legitimacy and fear it brings them within their local networks.
Wow. So it sounds like a criminal cartel slapping a political or religious logo onto their illicit business to give themselves a PR boost.
That is a highly accurate way of visualizing it.
Hmm.
And, just to remind everyone neutrally, this is an empirical operational view of how these groups function. It's not a political judgment.
Right. But using that ideological banner provides these groups with things a standard street gang could never dream of, like dedicated recruitment pipelines, community tolerance, and a veneer of revolutionary legitimacy.
Exactly. They reap the financial profit of a criminal enterprise, shielded by the reputational armor of a political cause. Operationally, it is a brilliant survival strategy.
It really is. But let's zoom the lens back in for a minute. Because while massive organizations manipulate ideology for structural legitimacy, Gallagher argues this raw quest for personal profit is most glaring when we examine the lone actor.
Yeah, the lone wolf phenomenon is central to this new wave.
Hmm.
And the statistics Gallagher pulls from current literature regarding lone actors and mental health are really sobering.
He notes that it is estimated that up to 30% of lone wolf terrorists suffer from documented mental health issues.
30%. That figure is staggering.
It is. And when the public or the media sees a clear mental health history in an attacker, there's this immediate knee-jerk reaction.
Right, we tend to write the individual off entirely as just mentally ill.
We categorize the event as a tragic, isolated psychological break rather than a calculated act of terror.
But Gallagher argues that dismissing these acts as mere psychological breaks is a fundamental security failure.
Because these individuals do not exist in a vacuum, right?
Exactly. A mental health struggle doesn't spontaneously generate a specific, highly politicized target.
So what is actually happening there?
Well, what happens is that individuals with vulnerabilities like depression, severe paranoia, deep social isolation, they combine their very real personal frustrations with extremist ideologies that are highly accessible in their social milieu.
The ideology weaponizes their vulnerability.
Yes, it gives their amorphous personal pain a concrete target. It tells them, you aren't a failure, you are a victim of this specific group, and you can be a hero if you strike back.
The text actually notes this mechanism aligns perfectly with Kathleen Bellew's extensive research on white supremacy movements.
Oh, absolutely. Her work details how white supremacist networks intentionally utilize lone wolf tactics by creating a toxic, broader social milieu.
They generate this pervasive atmosphere of grievance and imminent threat.
And vulnerable individuals, often struggling with their own mental health or societal standing, they latch onto this milieu. They consume the propaganda, internalize the grievance, and then act violently on their own.
Seeking the profit of being celebrated as a martyr by that online community.
Right. Interestingly, Gallagher compares the behavior of today's lone wolves directly to the actors from the 1880s anarchist wave, who also utilized isolated assassinations to achieve infamy.
Okay, I have to push back a little here on behalf of the listener because there's a very fine line to walk.
Sure.
If up to a third of these actors have documented mental health conditions, where is the boundary between a severe mental health crisis and an act of identity terrorism?
It's a tough question.
By giving it this sophisticated label, aren't we dignifying a psychological breakdown with a political title? Does calling it identity terrorism give too much credit to someone who is, at their core, just lashing out?
I get that. And that tension is exactly why Gallagher urges investigators to abandon the broad macro view and use his micro-level framework.
Okay, walk me through that.
Well, if we just label the attacker a traditional terrorist, we incorrectly assume they are a rational, strategic actor fighting for a pure ideology, which gives them unearned credit.
Right.
But if we swing the pendulum the other way and just label them mentally ill, we ignore the digital networks, the radicalizing forums, and the intentional propaganda that aim them like a loaded weapon.
I see. So by defining the act as identity terrorism driven by a search for personal profit, meaning that desperate search for belonging, notoriety, or reputation, we accurately map the threat.
Exactly. We see the exact mechanism of how their illness was exploited.
It is about accurately diagnosing the disease so you can actually treat it. You cannot disrupt a plot or build an effective intervention program if you refuse to understand the psychological payoff the plotter is chasing.
And that transition from theory to practice is where the book really becomes a manual for law enforcement.
Right, because if personal frustrations and the pursuit of notoriety are the true engines of this new fifth wave, security practitioners need a concrete way to map out these risks.
And Gallagher delivers on that by outlining 5 specific factors that culminate in his conception of profit.
These are the actual levers that investigators are trained to look at.
Yes, they are cooperation, the individual, financial distance, and reputation.
Let's walk through the mechanics of how these 5 factors interact in the real world.
Well, the interplay between the cooperation factor and the financial factor is particularly revealing.
This goes back to those extensive interviews Gallagher conducted with law enforcement professionals back in 2014, right?
Yeah, those interviews highlighted a fascinating dynamic. Traditional organized crime syndicates actually want very little to do with ideological terrorists.
Which makes sense. The traditional mobster or cartel boss is fundamentally a businessman. They want to operate quietly and avoid heat.
Exactly. Partnering with a terrorist brings the full, crushing weight of international intelligence agencies and national security apparatuses down on their operations.
Yeah, the criminal codes and anti-terror banking laws passed after 9/11 made it incredibly toxic to finance terrorism.
Criminals won't just hand over cash or weapons to these actors because the risk of being labeled a terror financier destroys their own illicit business model.
So actual financial profit-like moving hard currency becomes incredibly difficult for the modern terrorist.
And because traditional financial networks and criminal cooperation are largely closed off, reputation steps in as the primary currency.
It literally replaces cash.
It does.
Yeah.
Reputation allows an extremist to crowdsource funding, attract recruits, and fulfill their psychological need for status.
Which brings us to the distance factor. In the past, you had to physically travel to a training camp to get that reputation.
Right, but now, digital distance is completely collapsed.
A radicalized individual sitting in a basement in London or Ohio can instantly connect with a recruiter in Syria or a white supremacist forum in Eastern Europe.
The internet provides immediate delivery of their reputational profit. And finally, you have the individual factor, which acts as the anchor.
Law enforcement must profile the unique psychological needs of the suspect, right?
Exactly. Are they a narcissist seeking fame? Are they deeply isolated and seeking a surrogate family? The individual's specific psychological deficit determines what kind of reputation they will seek out.
Looking at those 5 factors together, it really paints a picture of a constantly evolving threat. And as we look to the future, Gallagher's framework also offers a projection of where this might go next.
Yeah, he emphasizes that terrorism is never static. While we are currently navigating this fifth wave of identity terrorism, he cautions against assuming older waves are permanently extinct.
Right. He notes the strong possibility of a resurgence of left-wave terrorism.
That third wave from the 1960s that relied heavily on anti-colonialism and social justice narratives.
And specifically, Gallagher points to the ongoing conflict in Gaza stemming from the October 7, 2023 attacks on Israel.
He views this conflict as a potential catalyst that could easily drive a global resurgence of that specific anti-colonial ideological framing.
But adopted by new actors seeking their own form of identity profit.
Exactly.
So why does mapping out these 5 factors matter to you, the listener, beyond just being an interesting academic exercise?
It matters because understanding this completely changes how you view global security.
It shows you that modern counterterrorism isn't just about dropping bombs on a training camp or debating an ideology on a geopolitical stage.
No, it is about disrupting the individual payoffs.
If a lone attacker is committing an atrocity solely for notoriety, for clout, or to cure a sense of personal invisibility, the way society counters that threat has to change entirely.
It forces a redesign of the entire security architecture. Authorities aren't just scanning for religious zealots reading manifestos anymore.
They have to stand for highly alienated individuals who are desperately shopping for a violent identity to wear.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have. And the core takeaway from Gallagher's Terror for Profit is that the old models of understanding global violence are breaking down.
We have moved decisively away from the religious wave that dominated the post-9/11 landscape.
We are now navigating the complex, highly personal era of identity terrorism. It is an era where the pursuit of profit, redefined as reputation, belonging, and notoriety, is the true engine.
And it drives both the isolated lone wolf struggling with mental health and the massive organized criminal syndicate flying an ideological flag of convenience.
That framework is absolutely vital for anyone trying to accurately process today's security landscape, whether you are a policymaker drafting legislation or just an everyday news consumer trying to make sense of a chaotic world. So, the next time a breaking news alert pops up on your phone and the talking heads are endlessly debating a group's radical ideology or a lone attacker's supposed religious fervor, you now have the diagnostic tool to look past those surface level claims.
You can ask yourself the micro-level question. What personal profit, what enhancement of reputation or twisted celebrity was this actor actually seeking?
And that shift in perspective leaves us with a final, lingering question for you to ponder on your own.
Yeah, if Gallagher is correct that reputation, notoriety, and digital clout serve as the primary currency for modern identity terrorists, could the very way we in the media consume, click on, flag, and share news about these horrific events be inadvertently funding the exact profit these actors are violently seeking?